he believed in God, he was justified by faith, and he was called the father of all who believe. Who is this man? What did he do to earn that title? Let's find out in today's episode of the Bible in a minute. Abraham believed God would fulfill his promise. This is a quote from Romans chapter 4, verses 20 to 22. He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was fully persuaded that what God had promised he would also bring to pass, and so it was accounted to him for righteousness. Therefore, being justified by faith, he believed in God, who then made the everlasting promise to Abraham and his offspring. And not only this, but rejoicing greatly. In hope he looked forward to the day when he would have many descendants, because, he said, the promise is not for me only, but for my offspring as well. Now let's go a little deeper with our word study. Abraham did not waver. Greek word here is the compound word apologiamai. It's made up of two words, apolemy, meaning destruction, and logos, meaning word or speech. So the definition of apologamy is to speak against, to argue, to contradict, to slander, to disparage, or to accuse. So Abraham did not argue with God, nor did he say bad things about God. Instead, he fully believed what God said. So the next time you feel like giving up, just remember, don't argue with God. He always keeps his word. Abraham fully persuaded that what God had promised he would also bring to pass. Abraham didn't just believe that God could make the promise a reality. He knew and trusted that God would actually make it happen. And so it was accounted to him for righteousness. The Greek word for accounted is logosomai. That's where we get our English word logic. Logosomai means to reckon or to count. So God counted or reckoned Abraham's faith as righteousness. We know from James that faith without works is dead. But the fact that Abraham believed God's promise was enough for him to receive God's favor and be declared righteous. It wasn't until later that Abraham demonstrated his faith by offering up Isaac on the altar as a burnt offering. You can watch more about that story in our episode on Genesis 22. Therefore, being justified by faith, he believed in God, who then made the everlasting promise to Abraham and his offspring. The term justified by faith is a perfect tense passive verb in the Greek. This means that Abraham was declared righteous by God at a certain point in the past, but that declaration continues to have an effect in the present. Or in other words, since he was declared righteous, Abraham now lives his life under the category of being righteous. But there's more. Abraham didn't only trust God to fulfill his promise, but he rejoiced greatly in hope and looked forward to the day when he would have many descendants. The Greek word for rejoice is a compound word, euphreno, made up of two words, eu, meaning good, and phreno, meaning mind or heart. So euphrane means to cheer one's heart. When someone cheers your heart, they are causing you to rejoice. This is exactly what happened to Abraham. God gave him a reason to rejoice, and he allowed that promise from God to transform his heart. The Greek word for hope here is elpis, which refers to a confident expectation of receiving what is hoped for. The main difference between hope and faith is that faith deals with the unseen world, and hope deals with the future. Abraham had faith in God, and he also had a hope in the promise of a son. Abraham looked forward to the day when he would have many descendants. The Greek word for descendants is a compound word geneia, made up of the word genos, meaning kind or race. Geneia means offspring, or race or generation. Abraham knew that the fulfillment of God's promise would extend beyond himself and impact his future generations. And he said, "The promise is not for me only, but for my offspring as well." Abraham understood that this promise was not for him alone, but for his family and future generations as well. The Greek word for promise is a compound word, huperbola, made up of huper, meaning over, and balo, meaning to throw. So huperbola literally means a throwing over, or an overcasting. This is where we get our English word hyperbole. So God didn't just make a small promise to Abraham, he made a big promise to him, a promise that would be cast far and wide for all generations to come. Abraham looked forward to a great multitude of descendants because he said, "Many will be his offspring." Abraham didn't only expect to have one son, but a whole lot of them. The Greek word for many is Paula. It's the same word used in Matthew 8:26, where Jesus calmed the storm and said, "Where is your faith?" He was in a boat with his disciples, and they were being tossed about in a sea of Galilee. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the sea, and they ceased. Then he said to them, "You men of little faith, Why are you so fearful?" Here, Jesus is chiding his disciples because they had very little faith, didn't believe that he could calm the storm. And he's saying to them, "Why do you have so little faith? Why do you have such a small view of my power?" Jesus was in the boat with them, so he knew they would be okay. Their fear wasn't based on the reality of their situation, but on their lack of faith. In the same way, Abraham did not let his limited perspective hinder his vision of God's promise. He said, "Look how old I am right now. Look at Sarai. She is even older than me. Can God really fulfill his promise through us?" Abraham didn't focus on his physical limitations, but he looked past those physical realities and focused on what God said. Years later, when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, they finally had their son Isaac. Now look at these words again. "The promise is not for me only, but for my offspring as well." These words are a great reminder for Christians today that the promises of God are not just for us, but for our children and future generations as well. We can pray for our children and future generations and believe that God will keep his promises in their lives as well. The Christian life is a life of faith. If we want to walk in faith, then we must learn to believe God for what he says. We must fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, and not on the circumstances surrounding us. We live in a culture that tells us to follow our dreams, to be everything we can be, to reach for the stars. But if we take our eyes off of God and his promises and put our focus on ourselves and our own abilities, we will miss out on what God has planned for us. So today, I challenge you to fix your eyes on Jesus and believe God for his promises. Don't ever let your circumstances dictate your level of faith. No matter what, never allow your hope to fade. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Bible in a Minute. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, if you want to support us in making more videos like this, you can go to our support page. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.